everyone. Welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my honor to be able to have acclaimed author with us, Mr. Andrew Lawler. Andrew is the author of four books: A Perfect Frenzy Under Jerusalem, The Secret Token, and Why Did the Chicken Cross the World? He has also written more than 1,000 newspaper and magazine articles, and his byline has appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, National Geographic, and Smithsonian. Andrew, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Becky. It's wonderful to be here.
Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been a journalist for more decades than I can count. I started as just kind of a newspaper reporter and worked in Washington and kept writing longer and longer stories and eventually started writing features. And then they got so long that the only thing left to do was to start writing books. So that's what I spend most of my time doing these days. And I love that long form. It's so much more creative than those day-to-day news stories that I used to do.
Well, I wanted to ask you about, especially particularly your journalistic skill. What about the perils of being a journalist and the safety involved?
Well, it's certainly a lot more difficult these days. I would say, just in terms of employment. The journalism industry has been hit with layoffs across the board, and that's really disturbing because we so need good journalists. We need people who are willing to go to those city council meetings, people who are willing to go to Washington to find out what's going on, to root out corruption, to hold people who are in power to account.
Mhm.
This is really critical for our democratic society. So I can only encourage young people to get into the business, but knowing that it's a tough business to make a living in these days. And I'm fortunate because I may be the last generation of kind of print journalists who've been able to really make a living. I've been fortunate in being able to go from newspapers to work in magazines,
Mhm.
developed relationships with editors, and then, of course, moving on to as well doing books as well. So it's a tough time for journalists, but I can only encourage people to be creative and find ways to get out there and to do what needs doing and to dig into those topics that maybe aren't necessarily being looked at by others. Find the niche that is not filled. Find the passion that you want to bring to a story and see where it takes you.
Well, I know that yours involves a lot of travel. Um, Tell me about like your personal safety and how does that also affect your family life? Because
Yeah.
you're gone quite a bit. And I saw your tour schedule. It's, even for a book author, you're gone quite a bit. So how do you handle all that?
Well, I do. I love to travel. And I've covered particularly archaeology in the Middle East and Central Asia. That's been kind of area I specialized in, and also cultural heritage destruction. So I have been in places and countries that are in turmoil. And the best advice is to just find the story that has not been told. And I try not to be foolish. I always try to find a local person who knows the territory, who knows the language, what we call a fixer in the business, who can help guide me through what can be sometimes difficult circumstances. But I've really had very few problems going overseas and trying to report on sometimes some difficult situations. And I think we as Americans tend to be a little afraid of the outside world. And I found that in particularly in the Middle East, there are places where people are so kind and welcoming and hospitable. If you arrive and provide them with respect and you listen and you understand you're in a different culture, then 99 times out of 100, the experience I've had has been very positive.
Well, Andrew, would you care to share some of your work for us?
I do have my latest book, which is called A Perfect Frenzy: A Royal Governor, His Black Allies, and the Crisis That Spurred the American Revolution. And just to give your listeners a little background, I'm a journalist writing about archaeology, but I've also become interested in history, and I happened to stumble onto a story that was very close to home. It was about my hometown in the American Revolution and what happened then. And I realized that a lot of what I've been taught was actually incomplete and even untrue. And so I used my journalistic instincts to go into the historical archives to see if I could really understand what took place 250 years ago. And
And that's in Norfolk, Virginia?
this is in Virginia, correct? And so I could just do. Read a couple of pages? How would that be? This is the beginning of the book. Clear, with very little wind, and exceeding pleasant, being warm, noted George Washington at his Mount Vernon plantation. On that unusually mild February day in 1774, a cannon crew 100 miles to the south strained their eyes to be the first to spot a sail in the east. The bold, gravelly cliff on which they stood commanded a full view of the river down towards the Bay of Chesapeake, a contemporary visitor wrote, and a pretty land view, which contained some of the best lowlands in the province. To their backs loomed 100 or so homes, shops, and taverns of the little tobacco port of Yorktown. Below, people lined the wharves along the sandy shore of the York River. The mood was festive that Saturday afternoon as the crowd eagerly anticipated a glimpse of the highest-ranking woman to visit Virginia since its founding more than a century and a half before. Lady Charlotte Stuart Murray, Countess of Dunmore, was the niece of an admiral, daughter of one Scottish earl, and wife of another. She and 6 of her 7 living children had braved a hazardous winter crossing from England to New York before journeying south to Virginia to join Lord Dunmore, her husband and governor of the southern province. Another ship sailing the stormy Atlantic for British North America that season wrecked, drowning 3 crew and 80 of the 100 enslaved Africans chained beneath the deck. After an unusually swift 5-week crossing, the vessel carrying the Scottish aristocrats anchored off Manhattan on New Year's Day. I take the liberty of congratulating your lordship upon the safe arrival of Lady Dunmore and the rest of your right honorable family at New York, Washington wrote the governor in January. He even offered his carriage, horses, and best services in case her ladyship should travel by land. In the end, the family traveled by water from Maryland, sailing south through the bay and then up the York River, bypassing Mount Vernon on the Potomac. A stir arose when an elegant town coach driven by an enslaved African in baby blue and white livery rolled down the steep path from town to the docks. A coat of arms featuring a wild man and a beast with the Latin motto Furth Fortunae, go forth and seek your fortune, ornamented both doors. John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore, stepped out to the cheers of onlookers. One colonist described him as a short, strong-built, well-shaped, with a most frank and open countenance, while another recalled him as muscular and healthy, though of low stature. His friend, Sir Joshua Reynolds, had painted him a decade before as a stocky man with large calves, a tartan kilt, prominent ruddy cheeks, shining brown eyes, and a full head of red hair. At the time, he was a middling Scottish aristocrat with a rapidly growing family, rising debts, he never paid for the portrait, and few career prospects. His wife and sister used their connections to secure him a lucrative job as royal governor of New York, and in 1770 he left his children and pregnant wife to take up the post. Transferred to Virginia in 1771, he served as King George III's representative in the colony's capital of Williamsburg. Lord Dunmore was now a graying 42-year-old with a paunch, though he still had an athletic air reflecting his love of hunting and hiking. A cry went up from the bluff as the vessel carrying Lady Dunmore appeared on the horizon and swiftly approached the wharves below, carried by the incoming tide. The cannon crew, made up of Yorktown tavern owner Thomas Archer, his friend Benjamin Minnis, and 2 unnamed black men, snapped into action to fire a celebratory shot welcoming the Countess. One man swabbed the iron barrel with a wooden pole wrapped in rags, while another prepared to ram a gunpowder charge wrapped in cloth down its mouth. The explosive was a carefully ground and sifted combination of charcoal and sulfur, with saltpeter, potassium nitrate, to oxidize the volatile mixture. But the crew proved either too inexperienced or too excited. By ramming the rod too violently against the iron within, it occasioned a kind of friction, which communicated to the powder, reported eyewitness Clementina Rind, who edited one of the colony's 2 newspapers. The powder exploded prematurely as the men hovered over the barrel. The blast hurtled a searing wave of superheated particles and burning cloth onto their bodies. Archer's arm, face, and eyes were bruised in a most terrible manner, while Minnis suffered a severe burn on his thigh. The worst injuries of the explosion were inflicted on the two Africans. Each was dreadfully mangled, one of them having lost 3 fingers off his right hand, the other much burnt in his face, and his eyes are so much hurt that it is thought he will never recover their use. Their screams of agony drowned out the cheers below. The 34-year-old Countess disembarked soon after the accident. The tragedy, Rind reported, gave great pain to all present, and particularly, it is said, to Lady Dunmore. She had auburn hair, rosy cheeks, a delicate nose, kind eyes, and a lilting Scottish accent. One smitten Philadelphia attorney called her a very elegant woman who looks, speaks, and moves, and is a lady. After 4 years of separation, the governor hugged his wife of 15 years to his chest and then embraced their 3 sons and 3 daughters, including 2 sprightly, sweet teenage girls that one columnist called the 2 greatest beauties in America. Missing were a toddler deemed too young to make the journey and a son who had died the previous May at age 10. They climbed into the waiting carriages, helped by enslaved coachmen, as physicians tended to the wounded on the bluff. The accident proved a sinister portent. 7 years later, at this same site, 400 cannon would roar as more than 25,000 troops from 4 nations battled amid mud and gore, leaving much of the town in ruins. The outcome would humble an empire, birth a nation, and doom millions to lifetime servitude.
Wow. Andrew, when you read those words that you've written, especially the issue of servitude, how do you want, how, first of all, how do you feel reading that? And how do you want your readers to feel? What do you want the impact to be?
Well, many people that are listening may have been brought up with this idea of the American Revolution as a glorious effort to achieve liberty. And it was, but it was also something else. It also was a time when people who also wanted liberty wore redcoats, Americans who chose to fight for the British because they also sought liberty, because they were trapped in lifetime servitude by the very patriots who were proclaiming liberty as an important precept. So I really want to get across the contradiction and the horror of a war that was fought not simply for liberty by patriots, but also for those millions who were living literally in chains, who chose that moment to see if they too could become free. And of course, we know that most didn't, and it took a civil war 90 years later to get this country to a place where we provided liberty and freedom to all, not just to people of one color.
Mhm. Andrew, how does a journalist or a nonfiction writer remain impartial in the political or socioeconomic culture?
Hmm. Well, I actually don't believe in impartiality or objectivity. I don't think that these are actual concepts that really exist. So I always approach a story as consciously as I can, trying to understand, what's my background, what are my biases, what's the story that I kind of want to tell. I have to recognize and be aware of these things before I put pen to paper. I really have to be honest with myself. Now, I'm sure I haven't succeeded all the time, but my goal is to set aside my assumptions, to dive into a story, to learn as much as possible, to talk to as many people, read as many documents, think about what I'm reading, understand what other people have said, get as big a picture as I can, and then filter that in a way that tells a good and as accurate a story as possible. Um,
And
we
even if the truth is not pleasant.
Yes, and the truth varies. I mean, there is no single truth. There is a truth about the American Revolution that the Patriots fought the Brits. Okay, but there's also the truth that Black Americans also chose to fight, but on the other side. But they were fighting for the same thing. So, that's a story that to me is very compelling because I think it makes our history richer, and it also, I think, grants people kind of an interior life that sometimes in history we think of them as uh, chess pieces on a board, when actually what I found in researching this book was just the really tough personal decisions that people had to make. So I tried to find those individuals and illustrate what they were going through so that we could identify with them and then really feel more clearly the forces that were at work.
When you are researching your book, like when you begin A Perfect Frenzy, from start to finish, how long does it take you typically to complete your book?
Hmm. Well, it's never fully completed. I'm just working on a few changes for the paperback, which comes out in February. Um,
Even after the hardback was already
Oh
printed.
yeah. Oh yeah. There
Okay.
there are things that I want to tweak and alter and um some technical details. But it's a for me, typically in my books, it's a 3 to 4 year process. It's about a year to come up with an idea, put together a proposal. I have an agent. I work with my agent
Okay.
to come up to fine tune the proposal. That can take a year or more. Then finding a publisher, and then that another year or so of actually doing the research and writing and then another year of editing and preparing the book before it actually is born. So, it's a long process, and the writing is really only one section of that process. It's really good to understand that writing is maybe a fourth or a third of the process. The rest is involves the research, the talking to people, the getting the details worked out, the business aspects, the publicity at the other end, the marketing. It's all part of a package, and it's a cycle that I've learned to go through. I love the writing, but I also know that there's a tax. You got to pay your tax. The tax is to think. You have to think about other things that maybe don't come under the rubric of writing.
So does it help to have an agent? Like, would you recommend that for every writer?
Uh, Well, I certainly feel like it's worked for me. Now, I'm a nonfiction writer and I'm writing trade books. I mean, I'm writing for the general public. Now, there's so many more opportunities for people to publish on their own,
Hmm.
which I think is fine. But I found if you want to reach a broad audience and going through a more traditional, publishing house approach, that an agent is absolutely essential because I don't want to have to learn about the ins and outs of New York publishing. And my agent does that, and that 15%, and 15% is standard, and one should never pay more than 15%. Uh, and one should never pay an agent. Their job is to kind of get the deal,
Hmm.
and then they get their share, and you get your share. And for me, it's been well worth it. And I think getting a good agent is very much like going into a long-term relationship. I've had my agent now for going on 15 years, and
Wow.
and it's very important to cultivate that. And he really knows the business. He knows who will want a book. He'll tell me if I have a great idea or tell me if no, this won't work. And so it really helps me it saves me a lot of time, even though it's sometimes very challenging to take the criticism.
Well, Andrew, tell us where we can find your website and also your books. And
Sure. www.andrewlawler.com is my website, and you can find all four of my books there, along with my magazine articles, newspaper stories that I've done over the years that I continue to do. I've got a story coming out soon in the Atlantic and in Smithsonian Magazine that kind of relate to the topic that this book is about. So I'm constantly trying to write new pieces and stay current with what's going on in science and archaeology and history.
do you, since you wrote about the American Revolution, how important is Fourth of July to you? Like, what do you do to celebrate that day?
I think I do like most people I know. I hang out, I have a cookout, we go down the street, watch the fireworks, come home, have a drink, and that's it. To me, it's just a day to uh, to feel like everybody is in a way celebrating in the same way. I mean, to me, it's a very powerful holiday because it's one of the few things that I think we, particularly in today's turbulent political environment, we can all have in common. We can all celebrate the birth of the nation. Even though my book really brings up some of the issues around the founding of the nation and why it was founded and some of the problems that came with it, but that doesn't prevent me from enjoying the holiday.
Exactly. Well, Andrew, if you could be a time traveler,
Hmm.
where and who would you visit?
There's so many possibilities. I've always loved the ancient Near East because that's where cities and civilization as we know it began. So I think I'd like to go back to that first city. It's called Uruk in what's now Iraq. That's where we get the word Iraq actually from the first city. And I'd love to go back and talk to Gilgamesh, who was one of the early kings, and just say, what's the idea? Why would you want to do this? Why did you want to create a city? What is in it for us to do this? I'm really curious about the origins of our world. And to me, that's such a key moment when people decided to live together in large numbers and to have kings and priests and temples and traffic and bars and restaurants and everything that we take for granted today. At some point, it was all new. It happened for the first time. So I really would be curious to go back and get a feel for what people were thinking, why we made this enormous shift in the way we lived about 5,000 years ago. So that's one of 1,000 places I would like to be.
I'm always curious especially when I travel, is what made a particular person be in a particular location and say, this is my spot in the planet. This is where
Yeah,
I'm going to land. Or how does someone actually get born, in a different place? It's just fascinating to me. Is it by chance or is it they destiny to be placed in a different, culture? I'm just always curious. It's like
yeah.
speculative to me. It's like, how did this
Well,
happen?
yeah, I mean, for example, the character I write about, Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia at the time of the Revolution, he arrived really not even wanting to go to Virginia because it was a hot place. People got fevers, they died. There was no social life. He liked being in Manhattan, and suddenly he was thrust into this turmoil that came with the Revolution, and suddenly he was forced to make these, huge decisions with very little support or contact with the home country. And, I think about somebody like him who suddenly is really at the nexus of an important historical moment. And, he's human. There are moments when he wants to give up, and then other moments when he's like, no, I'm gonna fight. I'm not just gonna run away. So I think about people like him who were, whether it's fate or destiny or just chance, they end up in these situations and they really have to explore who they are and what their values are. To me, that's the real what makes history so interesting is that it really shows, who these individuals were, what they stood for. It's one thing to say you believe in something, but then will you actually fight for it?
Hmm.
Uh, so I love historical characters because I'm always curious what makes them tick and why they ended up where they did.
And who your character really is your character under duress. And and I love the fact that you mentioned that, you know who you are and your biases before you begin to write, and that you can remain true to yourself. I think so many times as writers, we tend to be, we want to write politically correct, or we want to not, ruffle too many feathers. But it sounds like that you recommend being true to yourself as a writer.
Well, this was a hard book because Lord Dunmore, the main character in the book, was my childhood villain. He was said to have burned down my hometown. He was said to be a drunk and a lecher and, a really bad guy. I was raised with that. And
Mm.
so when I started to dig into it, I had a certain set idea of who he was. And it was only after spending, a good year in the archives and talking to people and reading things that I realized that, oh my God, most of it's not true.
Oh, wow.
Most of it was propaganda that was propagated for political purposes, which later historians then took to be true, which then got passed down to me through my grandparents and my parents. So it was it was a difficult process because I had to really rethink who I am. I had to challenge my own ideas and assumptions that I just took as, as fact because that's what people had told me. So it was a very difficult personal process uh, to to rewire my brain to think about where I grew up and the founding of this country in a new way. So that's what I've tried to do in the book is to bring people along and to show them that what they thought was the case, which seemed, normal and typical, actually wasn't. And that to me is the value of going on a journey like this, whether it's physical or just in the archives, and then coming back and being able to really bring people along and help them appreciate how difficult it is for us to see the past in a new way, and how incredibly necessary it is. We always have to be reevaluating and thinking about the past if we want to understand what kind of country we want to have in the future.
In a way, you're kind of like an archaeologist because you're digging and you're digging the truth. So, did you ever want to become one? An archaeologist?
No, I break things.
Oh no.
I break. I am not good with delicate. I've broken a couple of beautiful, very old things, and so no, I watch and I take notes. I have my notebook and I have a pen, but I tend not to touch the things because
You
I will.
shine the light where they're digging.
Yeah,
They trust you
exactly.
with the light.
Yeah, and plus, I'm too peripatetic. I mean, I don't think I could sit and dig in the ground in the same place for 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons. I like to flit around, so I know a lot. I know a little bit about a lot of things, but
Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to share us a brief glimpse into who you are with us today at Briar House Writes. And I do want to encourage everyone to check out YouTube videos of interviews with Andrew. He is so fascinating. Seriously, you will love him. But Andrew, thank you so much.
thank you, Becky. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was great.